The Men of Courage movement is working to advance the narrative and success of black men in America. Now there's a new addition to the Men of Courage toolkit. It's a weekly podcast on topics such as family, self-care, mental health, and entrepreneurship. The guests for season 1 include a really stunning lineup. Dave Bing, Big Shawn, and Jerome Bettis. Here to tell us more is the host of the Men of Courage podcast, Shawn Wilson, from the Ford Motor Company Fund. Good to have you back on the show, Shawn.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so now you're getting into broadcasting. You just sit here in a couple of years and do this show,
Look,
right?
I try to do my best, Stephen Henderson. It was, definitely producing and hosting is a whole different level. So.
That it is. Talk about the things that you feel like a podcast gives you to add to this pretty robust toolkit you already have for Men of Courage.
Absolutely. So I'm a podcast head. Like I love podcasts.
Yeah.
When you're in your car, 30, 45-minute drive, really a great opportunity to just digest information. It's on your phone, and you really, get into it. And so one of the things that struck me is as we've traveled the country with Men of Courage doing forums, we were in Atlanta, Chicago, Baltimore, you name it, all these powerful stories of black men were in that room. And so what we wanted to do with the podcast was bring those stories out, let other black men really learn from these different individuals, because we firmly believe that black men have the blueprint for success. We just need to put it all in one place where they can digest it and then apply it to their lives.
If you think of some of those names I talked about in season 1, Dave Bing and Big Shawn, Jerome Bettis, those are men whose stories people think they know, right? They're famous, and they don't have a hard time getting attention for those stories. But you're asking them to tell a slightly different version, I guess, of those stories. And I think that's really important for people to understand.
Absolutely.
That they're maybe a little more complex than you think they are.
Yeah, I mean, we touch on everything from anxiety to, depression to how do we use the struggles as African-American men to our advantage? So what's our competitive advantage in this world as black men? So we hit on all of those different subjects, but then, this is hosted, the majority of the interviews are in the Men of Courage barbershop. So then we do fun things like a pick one challenge, because as you know, in a barbershop, you debate. Who's better, Isaiah Thomas? Right, exactly.
Try not to fight.
That's right. And so, we do some of that as well just to have fun, but it's been really interesting to sit down, and to your point, I know the majority of these guests, but even sitting down for an hour, asking questions, I walked away. For example, Dave Bing. We talked a lot about his business. So we talked about Dave Bing, the athlete, Dave Bing, the businessman, Dave Bing, the politician, Dave Bing, the mentor, right? Yeah. But one of the biggest learnings that came out of that for me was how he built his business, a $300 million business at its peak, and how he used that to give back to his people, to African Americans. And at one point, he had a $40 million payroll with 80% of the people on payroll being African Americans,
living, a lot of them right there around that headquarters where Bing Steel and the later companies were.
Absolutely. The other thing that was really interesting is, although we're all African American men and we have similar experiences and thoughts, we all have different point of views. So I was in Atlanta, driving around Atlanta with Andrew Young, civil rights icon Andrew Young, and we passed the Falcon Stadium, and I said, yeah, what do you think about the NFL kneeling thing? And his answer shocked me. He said he didn't agree with it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so you got to go to the podcast.
I was going to say, I got to listen to the podcast and
to find out why. That's
really?
Right. But it was really, and we got into this, it was a tense conversation a little bit, but by the end of it, I totally understood his point of view.
Where he's coming from, huh?
Absolutely, and it wasn't that he's against Kaepernick, but he literally just has a different point of view of how to get to the end goal. And it's something that we can all learn from.
Yeah. You've been at this for a while, Men of Courage. Talk about some of the outcomes. You're a funder. I know you are always asking people you're funding.
That's right.
What are your outcomes look like?
Absolutely.
So now I'm turning the tables on you.
No, absolutely. So I think a couple of things, right? One, the movement. It really feels like a movement. And I think we've been able to do that because from day one, although Ford is behind it and Ford funds it, one of the things we understand is you have to have collective impact and buy-in from stakeholders. So we really gave ownership to Dave Bing to Big Shawn to Shaka Senghor to say, help us build this in a sustainable way. And so one of the biggest takeaways from this is you have to do that in order to build longevity. But then just the connections. So you have, through these forums, you have businesses that have been started. You have people who have received funding. One of the most powerful anecdotal stories came out of Baltimore, where we had a police chief sitting at the table with a returning citizen, right? Wow. So here's a young man who was accused of a crime. Video came out to show that he wasn't guilty, but he couldn't get his record expunged. The police chief said, I'm going to make it my mission to expunge your record. Wow. And within 3 weeks, his record was expunged, which now allowed him to get a job and all these other things. So you have a lot of that, but more importantly, you just see the connections that are happening on a national scale. And now we're going to be launching a traveling exhibit in partnership with the Smithsonian starting in 2019 that'll travel the country highlighting African-American men and what they bring to our country.
Yeah. What about the impact on young people? You talked about the young man in Baltimore, but I know that's your goal overall, is to really show young people, young African-American men, that there are alternatives, there are opportunities that maybe they don't know about.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one of the strengths and unique components is that it's an intergenerational lineup, as you listed, right? And once again, what these young people can see is, okay, so I'm into Big Shawn. These young folks are into Big Shawn, so they listen to him, but then they listen to Andrew Young, and they'll hear similarities. So both Andrew Young and Big Shawn talk about love as a solution to racism. Wow. And specifically looking at individuals who are racist as having an illness and being sick. And so how can you be mad at someone who has a disease? Wow. And both of them kind of talked about it from different perspectives, but share that same vision. And that's powerful. Yeah.
All right, so podcast, what's next? Are you going to have a TV show? Angling for this one?
So season 2, we're going to start taping for season 2. And I think Stephen Henderson is going to be on there. I don't know. I'm trying to do the lineup now.
We'll see. I'm always happy to help.
That's right. That's right. But really, what's next is, let's take this model that we've developed and let's start to get it out to the masses. And that's what podcasting does, is allows anyone around the world to hear these stories, which builds empathy. It helps us change the perspective of Black men in America, which is ultimately our mission.
Yeah, that platform, reach of that platform is just amazing.
Absolutely.
All right, congrats on the podcast.
menofcourage.com to download it.
Yes.
iTunes, Google Play.
We'll have all of that on our
website. Fantastic. See you in season 2.
Yeah, that's right. I'll be there. You tell me when to show up. All right, thanks for being here.